What's up, Strike Team, and welcome back to another episode of Strike Team Official. So we all know karate doesn't have the greatest reputation when it comes to practicality. This has been something we've talked about on this channel a lot. It is the core reason I created this channel in the first place. So I've been doing a lot of research into trying to understand where karate lost its practicality and how. Through my research, I've come up with a lot of new information, and it's surprisingly much more political than I had originally thought, as well as spiritual, the reasonings behind this. And I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of share this with you guys today to understand kind of what happened and where karate went from a really practical martial arts or just Japanese style martial arts in general, where they went from like a really practical combat based systems to kind of what we see today, which is more based on art and sport. When looking at the history of karate or Japanese martial arts in general, you really need to look at the culture of all of Japan, because it's not just about the history of the style, but the culture in which it evolved. And when people talk about modern martial arts or traditional versus modern karate, normally we look at when karate became systematized, which was around 1912, 1913, by Genshin Funakoshi, bringing Shotokan into the schools and really systematizing it, and all the other karate styles following his lead. However, martial arts in Japan weren't always like that. And if you look at martial arts in general, you could even take, push that time frame back. I have the dates over here so I don't forget them, all the way down to like the 1860s, okay, so in the Meiji period. Okay, and this is about the time where Japanese martial arts in general, you start seeing a shift moving away from practicality and more toward spiritual purposes, enlightenment, and self-betterment. So it moves away from the jutsu, as we say, the I want to be able to use this skill to hurt you, to the do, which is more the idea of using martial arts as a pathway for your way of life and for spiritual purposes as well. And a lot of that is because during the Meiji period, you have a serious ramp down in violence in Japan. And so that's one of the huge reasons for it. And one good way to kind of look at that is the Tenjin, I'm going to so mispronounce this, I think it's Shinryu? Shinryu school, okay? Which is a martial arts school that was very, very much focused on practicality and application. It had around 5,000 students, and its primary source of training was sparring, okay? And this was like a style almost of jiu-jitsu, right? But over time, as the idea of peace and harmony became more important to Japanese society and less focused on the martial aspects of the society, that school actually practically disappeared and is one of the ancestor schools of Aikido, which is really interesting to look at because Aikido is not heavily based on sparring. It's much more systematized, and it's a stark difference. You have a school that's mostly based on, I'm gonna show you a technique and we're gonna drill it, almost like the way you look at like BJJ, to an Aikido situation, which is, like I said, the exact opposite of that. And so that's one of the huge differences that cultural norms and shifts can cause. This time frame is really interesting because you're looking at a time in Japan's history where they're trying to make a culture of unity within its own borders, and where the martial arts are moving away steadily from practicality and more toward this like unifying spiritual, almost like thought-provoking martial arts system, where it's more like a way of life than it is about harming your opponent. And it's watering down the traditional arts. But at the same time, Japan is still, very imperialistic. They're going to be involved in World War I and II. They're going to be involved in South Korea, which horrible war crimes, right? And so you have this really interesting dynamic of a very war-focused Japan to the outside world. But on the inside, from what I've read, it seems very much that they were becoming more and more, trying to move away from that, martial arts are just for killing mentalities. And it's really interesting when you look at this time frame, how, both the founder of Judo, Kano, and the founder of Shotokan Karate we're bringing these to the schools as a matter of a PE class, more about building strong bodies, strong minds, but also these conversations of unity and these conversations of strengthening, your role in society through martial arts, and less about can I beat you up or not beat you up. And there are many quotes that kind of really express this throughout multiple Japanese martial arts systems. One of the best quotes I've ever read, kind of explaining this move away from practicality into this, more way of life thought process within martial arts, is actually found in this book, Budo, The Martial Ways of Japan. And this book was actually put together by the Budokan, which is like as official as it gets. That's the official source of martial art knowledge in Japan, right? And they put this book together, and it shows the history of martial arts in general, as well as the history of specific martial arts. And one of the martial arts that they're covering is archery, which is called Kyudo in Japanese. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. However, they're talking about the importance of the beauty and aesthetic of the art form, right? Kyudo archery is one of the most beautiful martial art forms I've ever seen, in the way the person moves. It just looks so purposeful in every movement. And you compare that to Western archery, which looks focused, but very different. So to really explain the difference between how the West looks at it compared to how Japan looks at it, I'm actually going to read a straight quote from this book, okay? So the idiosyncratic approach to what constitutes a true technique is evident when comparing Kyudo with Western-style archery. In Kyudo, the entire process of shooting the arrow from the time of entry into the shooting position to the retreat after the shot is considered consequential. The process is seen as representative of the archer's strength and virtue as a human being, regardless of whether or not the arrow hits the target. Okay? So when looking at Japanese archery, every motion that the archer takes is as important, if not more important, than if the arrow actually hits the target. And it's supposed to show who that archer is as a person, right? It's deeper than just, I can kill you with my arrow. Because in America, we in the West, I'll do whatever I want. If it hits the target, it hits the target. I win. We're about getting to the point. But Japan's way they start looking at martial arts in their culture is, it's not just about getting to the point, it's how you got to the point. And that is a significant difference in how the West views the importance of just pure practicality versus Japan viewing the importance of the method and everything else that goes into the art, more than just your ability to shoot a bow and arrow well, or throw a punch properly, or do a throw properly, or whatever else comes with that. There's actually historical information from the Diet, and the Diet is Japan's version of Congress, right? Where they talk about what they want to be taught in school systems around physical education, or what was called physical discipline at the time. And they actually mention how they're worried about too much focus on competition or technique when it comes to doing martial art trainings in schools, and not enough on just moderate exercise, which is what they're focused on. So too much competition and too much technique was actually something the Diet itself, their Congress, was against. So again, a great example of why the people pushing karate into the school systems and martial arts into the school systems kind of moved away from the pure technical aspects of martial arts in general, was to appease the government and politics at the time. Now, Japan was sort of living in this time where, that peace within its own borders was more important, and the practicality of martial arts became less and less important. But there was a moment in history there where this did very temporarily switch. And this was, again, as they were repping up for war, they wanted to use martial arts as a way to create strong nationalism. And one thing about a lot of the Japanese martial arts is, things like Kyudo, Judo, karate, things like this, they are martial arts that are very strongly Japanese. At least that's how they were taught at the time, right? So like the Chinese history of karate was not necessarily talked about heavily during this time frame. But judo, the Japanese jujitsus, the different swordsman arts of Japan, very the naginata, very Japanese centered martial art forms. And because of this Japanese pride and heritage, martial arts was used to stimulate a form of national pride. And this was something that was very important as well when looking at the fact that while they were looking for peace within its own borders, it was very imperialistic on the outside. So martial arts was used as a way to create nationalism within its own borders while still maintaining peace among its own citizens. The mix of nationalism and martial arts actually spelt the downfall for practical martial arts through a lot of Japan. The school system was no longer allowed to teach martial arts as ordered by the Allies. They actually made a rule that Japan was not allowed to teach martial arts anymore. They had to get rid of the term Budo, or the martial way, or the warrior's way, in all of their schools. So every martial art was stripped out. Okay, and this happened in 1945. No more martial arts in schools, order of the Allies. Okay, and it took a while for the martial arts to slowly get back in there. Starting, I believe, in 1950 with judo. Judo got back into the school system. But even so, they were no longer allowed to call their martial arts Budo in schools. They had to call it kakuji, which means combat sports. Not martial way, not warrior arts, okay? But it had to be combat sports only, with the emphasis on sports. Because when judo came back into the school system in 1950, it was no longer teaching itself as a realistic martial art for self-defense or anything like that. It was only seen as PE and sport. That is the only way it could be taught. And that was because of the World War II and the backlash from the Allies. Matter of fact, it wasn't until 1989 that they were allowed to bring Budo back into the school system. So, I mean, this is the effect of World War II on how people view martial arts in Japan is something I think a lot of people don't truly understand. The martial aspect of martial arts was stripped from the school system by force by the Allied forces. So after this, it follows logical thought. Like, what happens to karate after it's been stripped of talking about its practicality in the school system? And what happens with judo and all these other styles? Well, they lose their practicality. That's what happens. They have to be sports-based systems only. So it leads to where we are today with a lot of Japanese martial arts systems that, due to a mix of culture, which was already watering down the martial arts styles, to then literally legal precedents where it was illegal to, at least in the school systems, be teaching war-based martial arts systems and actual practical martial arts, to where we are today, where so much of the Japanese systems are no longer seen as very practical. And it's due to a mix of these two things. And now Japanese culture is so peaceful that it's, self-defense is not even something that's heavily thought about in Japanese culture today, right? I used to live in Japan. I think many of you guys know that. And I remember speaking to one of my coworkers. I was an English teacher. And I mentioned how I was learning karate for self-defense, or at least that's one of the things that got me started in karate. And she was like, self-defense? Why do you need self-defense? Right? Because Japan is so safe, it doesn't even cross a lot of their minds. And I actually have a whole video on why self-defense is barely thought of in Japan, because the country is so safe now. It's one of the safest countries in the world. And so when you look at that entire history, you look at the general watering down through the Meiji era. Okay, you look at how the Diet, or their version of Congress or Parliament, very much, was not pushing technical skill in schools, but more just moderate exercise. And then how when they switched that and they moved to like martial arts for nationalism, for war, how the Allied powers saw that as a threat and totally shut it down, so that martial arts could only be dribbled back into the school system slowly and only purely as sport. And then you start looking at where martial arts from Japan are today, and it starts making sense. It starts making sense. And I haven't even touched on the Confucius principles of martial arts and how that affects it too, especially today. Uh, because these principles coming from China, into Japan, and there's this whole thing around Confucianism, where you kind of look to the past for guidance. You're not necessarily looking forward and creating your own. You're looking toward the ancestors, and sort of like the ancestor worship you see a lot in Asia, and how that also has a strong effect on the lack of growth in many Asian martial arts, right? We're doing a technique from Makata, and anyone might think they have an improvement to a move, but a lot of the time it's about what the master did and not what works best to be considered real, and that's very much a Confucian source, right? And so you add that on to all of this other history, stripping it of its actual martial practicality, and you end up in the world we are today. Yeah, and you see, guys, that's where you see these differences, where you see these arguments between guys who say practical karate guys versus traditional karate guys. Like, traditional karate guys are usually guys who are looking at karate from the perspective of usually around 1913, but any of that, Meiji kind of piece between each other thought process and how karate evolved in that time frame. And then a lot of the practical guys are trying our best to see what karate was like before these changes took place. And, there's a lot of guesswork involved, a lot of theory involved. And, you see these two dynamics within the karate world really, heavily right now, as karate's in this stage where it's kind of reinventing itself in a lot of ways, as people try to rediscover that original practical nature. But I thought this would be interesting to share. I'm sure as I read more, this is something that's really interesting. I'm sure there's many more books that I haven't read that I'll get into different details and show me more things about it. And as I learn more, I'll make more videos explaining more of the history and getting into deeper detail with you guys if you guys are enjoying it. So yeah, if any of you guys have any other history books going over martial art history, it doesn't even have to be karate, right? I love martial art history of all sorts. It's something I love reading and learning about. Put them in the comments down below, right? And as I learn more and gain more information, I'll share it here with you guys on the YouTube channel. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, kind of delving into the history of Japanese martial arts and the politics around it, and kind of where it moved away from practicality to where we are now, and this current resurgence in the practicality. And if you enjoyed it and want to listen to more, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'm sure I'll have more videos like this in the future. I also do a lot of practical karate application stuff, and I'm hoping to have martial artists of other styles come on, show stuff from their martial art, as well as, I might even do some combat sports stuff. Like, I do compete in Muay Thai and things like that. So who knows, the channel will grow. But I hope you enjoyed your time here, and see you next time. Peace.